Good evening, everybody. Good evening to our regulars and welcome to any new people that we have joining us this week. My name is Alan Freedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association and I am the MC for this evening as usual. Also visible on your screens are David Adler, President of the AJA, as well as our guest for tonight, Senator Jim Molan, who we will introduce in a moment. As usual with our sessions, we will chat with Jim for about 30 minutes, and after which point we'll open up the discussion for your questions from the audience. So as I always do, please indicate your interest in asking a question by clicking on the participants button and then click on the raise hand or the green tick. It just makes it easier for us to identify you. I'll just mention also that some people put questions on the chat, which is fine, but I must say that it is hard to locate them if I want to come back to a question, because they tend to get lost in all the chat as the screen scrolls up. So if you want to ask a question, by all means indicate it and you can ask it personally. So the chat function is going as usual, and also everybody has been muted to prevent those annoying noises during the first half an hour of the session. Now, Senator Jim Molan is a former Major General in the Australian Army and, apart for a few months in the middle of last year, has been a Senator for New South Wales since 2017. He has had multiple roles commanding various regiments of the Australian Army, and in April 2004 was deployed for a year to Iraq to serve as Chief of Operations for the new headquarters multinational force there. Following his retirement from the Australian Army, Senator Molan was appointed by the Abbott government as a special envoy for Operation Sovereign Borders and was subsequently credited with being an architect of the coalition's Stop the Boats, Australian border protection and asylum seeker policies. So it is fair to say that he knows a thing or two about both military and security issues, and it is in this context that we're delighted to welcome him tonight. Senator Molan, thanks for joining us on the Australian Jewish Association session, and welcome to our weekly event.
Alan, thank you very, very much. It's very generous of you and David to invite me. And I'm just not too sure, will you lead me in questions?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
At this point, I'll hand over to David and he'll lead the discussion. Over to you, David.
Thank you.
Okay, well, it's a privilege and an honour for us to be hosting Senator Molan this evening. I'll probably call him Jim because we met recently at the CPAC conference, and I want people to know that after my talk, one of the first people to come up and enthusiastically shake my hand was Senator Molan, and he indicated that he'd be happy to do an event for AJA, and I was very keen to make him deliver on that obligation as soon as possible. So here we are this evening. So we're going to talk about national security, but I want to slip in, Jim, an off-topic subject, because recently you've made a public statement that you are now in support of defunding the ABC. So what's that all about?
David, I did make that statement, and I made it on Sky News and on Paul Murray Live. Yep. And I made it in the context that consistently over as long as I can remember now, the ABC has been blatantly biased. And the bias, I think, and the self-delusion in the ABC, I believe that we recently saw in a day or so ago when a board member, a director of the ABC, wrote an article defending its unbiasedness and the way that it operates. He made a statement. Gersh, I think his name was, from memory. I hope that's roughly correct.
Yeah, Joe Gersh.
Yes. He was very supportive of the ABC, and he said, of course we're balanced. We've got conservatives like Malcolm Turnbull on the show. And I thought to myself, wow, there's the problem. But what really brought it on was the 60 Minutes show, followed by Q&A on Monday night, which attacked Tudge and Porter, two ministers who have been somehow and with a great deal of detail involved in sexual affairs with members of their staff, or allegations were made along those lines. Now, one doesn't condone that. That's monumentally stupid. Men of a certain age are totally and absolutely stupid. But that wasn't the issue. The issue was that this was the most appalling hit job that I have ever seen. And it was followed up by Q&A with Malcolm Turnbull going directly from Four Corners onto Q&A and continuing on in that audience. So for months, the ABC under Louise Milligan trawled through years of Christian Porter's background, interviewed people, rang people up asking for dirt, and finally came up with the program. And I'm afraid, I've had the ABC now on a number of occasions do hit jobs on me, which proves that I'm pretty stupid because I keep going back. I was really taken to bits personally by the ABC in the first Q&A show of this year, which was related to the fires. And as the only representative of the government, the only Conservative on the show, it was a hit job of a very, very clever hit job. And that's the 6th time I've been on Q&A. And on every one of those occasions, except one, I was the target. It was boats or migration or various government policies. And, I don't mind that. As a politician, I don't mind putting my head above the parapet and getting a kicking. So I was very happy to go on a 6th time because you've got to get out there and do it. And I'd been the Prime Minister's rep through the fire areas during January and February of this year. And I was ready to tell people what we'd done, to defend what we'd done, to encourage people to apply for recovery, et cetera, But that wasn't it. It was a setup on me as against everyone else there. And yeah, this is the life of a politician. But I don't believe, I wouldn't advocate particularly defunding the ABC. There are various things there are various ways of controlling the ABC. I would put the requirement for them to be unbiased, to be balanced, out of their charter, and I'd put it into legislation tomorrow.
Okay. Jim, if ever you and your colleagues want to take action, I've got to tell you, we have a particular beef with the ABC, and that is their anti-Israel bias over
right. Okay, good.
a long period of time, the way that they've covered conflicts and other issues. And I went on to Sky News once on that issue, and after it, I was contacted by a couple of members of our community and given a 45-page dossier of various written complaints,
yes,
trying to get things corrected through the ABC internal review process. Now, those things are some years old.
Yes.
There is a long record of problems, and if ever it's useful, I'm happy to give you a copy of that, or your staff.
Thank you.
But let's get on to the main topic, which is national security and issues facing Australia primarily, and probably, if we have time, a couple concerning Israel. What do you mean by national security? It is more than just military, I think.
Oh, my goodness, it is. And national security covers every aspect of a nation. And national security is essentially concerned with the sovereignty of a nation. And the sovereignty of a nation is all about the freedom of that nation, to act in its own interests. And if you don't have sovereignty, in my view, is a sliding scale. You can have lots of sovereignty. You can have less sovereignty. You can decide to lower your level of sovereignty, as the United States did after the 9/11 attacks, and commit itself in different ways. we have decided to lower the level of our sovereignty by embracing globalisation and becoming and localising 30% of our export trade with China, and that gives China the ability to take action against us, and we saw that exactly today. So, national security covers the entire nation. National security has very, very little, only in the extreme, to do with the military. And this is where I see that we in Australia have a serious deficiency. And that deficiency is that, you know, we come out with a military plan, and the Prime Minister in July announced what was called a strategic update, and also a force structure review, and $270 billion was promised to the ADF over the next 10 years. Now, that's great for the ADF. And the question I ask is, if the Prime Minister thinks that the ADF needs $270 billion over the next 10 years, what does the rest of the country need? And for the last 75 years, this nation has politely sent off its military to go overseas to distant places and to fight in various wars, which the strategic basis of that commitment was to encourage the United States to come to our aid in an extreme circumstance, part of the strategic commitment, to come to our aid in an extreme circumstance should that develop in the future. I've got no worries about that. That was a strategy that seemed to have worked over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. And so sovereignty can slide up and down. You can decide how much sovereignty you want, and that's very, very good. So a nation which makes a decision, like I believe Australia has over the last 75 years, to surrender a good deal of its sovereignty and security for prosperity, may not be balancing things as well as it should. I mean, we are a fabulously wealthy country. As 25 million people, we've got, the 12th or 13th largest GDP in the world, and Russia has got the 13th, the next smallest GDP. Russia's GDP is smaller than Australia, yet it runs a 300,000 person military, a nuclear deterrent, an enormous air force, and an enormous navy, and impoverishes its people to do that. Now we've gone another way. We want democracy, we want security, and we want prosperity. The time may have come now where we may have to surrender something.
Yeah, okay. Then you've spoken specifically in the past about petrol, fuel, power, those sort of things. And I'm thinking you might have had in mind that there could be a potential problem in the Straits of Hormuz or the South China Sea where our shipping comes through. If there was a problem, what reserves, for the record, what reserves do we have and what should we be targeting? Well,
suppose we were cut off from sea transport tomorrow, which is not beyond the realm of reason, in a conflict between the United States and China in our region. I think that would be the immediate consequence. We have enough fuel, that is petrol, diesel and aviation turbine, for no more than 30 days, probably closer to 23 days. Now, that concerns me greatly, and it concerns the government, and the government has put a lot of money into buying crude and storing it in the US because we can't store it here. It's also got a lot of money, $200 million plus, to try to keep our refineries working. But of course, we've just been notified that the Kwinana refinery in Western Australia will close in the next 6 months. So the 1.17 cents per litre, which we intended paying at least Kwinana to keep operating as a government subsidy, obviously wasn't enough. And we're not short of fuel. Up in the Northern Territory, we have one of the largest, at a place called Beetaloo, one of the largest deposits of shale oil and gas in the world. And they've drilled up there, and all we need to do now is develop that, and we'll be laughing. The Northern Territory have approved it. We've got, we managed to store a lot of oil under this country, but of course the states won't let us get at it. If it's fracking, the states are not interested in most cases in allowing us to get it. And Victoria is appalling in that they won't let us get it the fuel or the gas, and the Bass Strait or the Bass Strait petroleum is running out. I use our liquid fuel deficiency and vulnerability as an example. So I use it as an example to say that the market, which ideologically a lot of Australians believe in, we as a government have an ideological tendency towards the market, using the market will provide great prosperity for us, extraordinary prosperity. We can always buy petrol cheaper in Singapore than we can ever make it in Australia, because they make it on a scale that we will never get close to. But of course, that produces prosperity because we have cheaper fuel. What it doesn't produce is any level of security. And of course, 90% of our fuel, either directly as a refined product or as crude, which goes up through the Straits and into China and other places in North Asia, comes from the centre of instability in the Middle East. And so I think, finally we are doing something about it. I use that as an example because I believe every part of Australia has that vulnerability. If you look at our pharmaceuticals, 90% of our pharmaceuticals come to this country from overseas. If you look at our fertiliser, if you look at our manufactured, 40% of our manufacturers come from overseas, and it's normally the top end of the 40%, of the 100%, the top 40% of that. The most sophisticated, the most expensive come from overseas. We need to have a national security strategy which looks across the nation and which decides which areas will leave to the market and which areas government must control.
Even if that means reimposing tariffs, for example, because because we might not be competitive in some essential products.
Or direct subsidy. I don't think we would, in this circumstance, I don't think we would apply tariffs because we want to remain a powerful trading nation, and the WTO would take us down. Okay. But I think exactly what we did with the refineries, we said we'll give you 1.17 cents per litre that you produce of refined product.
Let me ask you about a related matter.
Yep.
And that is giving control of critical infrastructure to foreign parties. Now, the Darwin port, of course, is an example. There is an airstrip in an airport in WA that was sold to the Chinese. I don't know what percentage of the water rights are owned by foreign parties. Is that sort of, and by the way, that's an issue that Australia shares with Israel. Israel's gone down the track of providing foreign powers with control of certain infrastructure as well.
Particularly China, yes.
Has that horse bolted, or is there something we can do about it?
No, we could undo that. If you take the iconic example of this, which is the Port of Darwin, Australia was not prepared, for whatever reason, to put $500 million into developing the Port of Darwin. The Chinese came in and said, we'll develop the Port of Darwin if you give us a 99-year lease. And when they wrote out the contract, the CEO had to be Australian, the majority of the board had to be Australian, and there was a take-back clause in that agreement. Now, I don't think it should ever have happened. It should never have happened for reasons other than security reasons. Well, no, that's not true. It should never have happened for other than that specific security reason. That is, we have the Port of Darwin. It shouldn't have happened because we should be able to identify, if we have an overall strategy, we may have identified that as being a key infrastructure. We've got much better on key infrastructure since then, and we should have said no, that's key infrastructure. We've knocked back a whole bunch of things since then through the Foreign Investment Review Board, and that's very, very important. And of course, now we've taken. Before there used to be a limit that was fairly high, so many $100 million, that if you brought that money in, you were going to buy something. Anything below that amount, the Foreign Investment Review Board had the ultimate say. We've now brought that down to zero. So if the Port of Darwin has provided anything for us and our waking up in relation to the threats to this country, it's allowed us to do that. But we still depend heavily. We would welcome Chinese investment in this country, but it's got to be on our terms and it's got to be in our interests. I think the Port of Darwin was clumsy and we didn't manage it well. It surprised the Australian people. It surprised the Americans even more.
And water, do you have a view on what's happening with water?
Yeah, my view is not well developed on water. I've tried to get involved in the controversy that's going on in that, but I run out of time. My view, though, with a daughter that's down there in the irrigation area in Swan Hill, my view is if you don't own land, you shouldn't own water. And as a New South Wales senator, I take the view we're sending far, far too much to Victoria and South Australia. That's totally parochial.
Okay.
But Minister Littleproud is moving on this in a dozen different ways, and I think he's making an impression, and this will change over time. We're clumsy, but we do learn, and that's what comforts me. Okay. Do we learn fast enough? That's the question.
How is Australia doing with cyber security threats?
I think we are very much aware of the threat to us in relation to cyber security. That's critical for the simple reason that for a long time we weren't. We have been the subject of significant attack, which the Prime Minister has spoken about, as a forcing function to get particularly the middle level, small to medium enterprises, taking cyber seriously. It's been expressed to me the belief that our major organisations, for example, the big banks, are fairly good on world standards. They're pretty good. Now, I don't want to say too much because we'll be taken out tomorrow, but this is an extraordinary threat to us. Everything that's not nailed down, all the intellectual property people can get their hands on, the Chinese in particular, through cyber attacks is being stolen. Foreign interference is coming to us through social media. As the head of ASIO said only a day or so ago, people are being accessed through LinkedIn. This is not exactly cyber and in the sense of cyber attacks, but it's use of the internet and foreign interference into the essence of what this country is. If you measure it by money over time, we're doing an awful lot. It's beyond me to say whether that's enough. I know we now have an offensive cyber capability. We can attack people, and those messages will be out there, and people will know that if we're attacked and we can identify, we will attack back. So that's some form of deterrent, but we can't match the tens of thousands of human beings who spend all their time in China working on cyber security, working on cyber attack, working in the offensive cyber industry that is in that country. We can't match that.
I think I know it's happening, but because of the nature of it, we don't know the detail, but there has to be cooperation with Israel on cyber security. Israel might be a regional power in the Middle East, but if there's one aspect in which it is a world power, it's cyber security.
And of course, that's all located in the town of Beersheba, and which has Australian links, of course.
Yes.
Yes, I'd be astonished if we don't have strong links with Israel on that. We'd have strong links with Singapore. We'd have strong links with a number of countries. We'd be helping other countries. I think that the organisational side of it is pretty good. I can't judge whether we're doing enough. The Prime Minister comes and every now and again and gives us all a fright by telling us what's going on, and that's the right thing to do.
Yeah. There's just one final area I'll raise, and I guess it also touches on to immigration policy, Jim, because I've now been personally to two police briefings on counter-terrorism, and it's publicly available. Last year's ASIO report identifies the #1 threat of terrorism as being Salafi Sunni Islam, with small individuals or small groups here that might be influenced, radicalised by influences overseas. Now, fortunately, our authorities have largely intervened before plans have been executed. But does that concern you as a growing threat? The the extremist Islamic terrorism threat, isolated small pockets.
Well, it does, but I wouldn't call it particularly growing. I'd call it ongoing.
Right.
The greatest problem we face in relation to Islamic extremist terrorist threats is that that they can do it with not much, and it comes out of nowhere. And if we go back and we see what's happened in France over the last couple of, and I think it was, where was the other place in Europe?
Austria.
Yes. I mean, that was appalling. And why did that happen? It happened because they couldn't control their borders. Mm. And people had taken advantage of those slack borders. They came in, they then got into that group of nations amongst which you can move freely within Europe. And they did. They moved to various areas, and they're dispossessed people, hateful people, and they've done appalling things, absolutely appalling things. We seem to have survived that. New Zealand, of course, had an Australian of European background who went there and reversed the entire process. So, and there's been a continual call out now, certainly by the opposition and the Greens within Parliament, about right-wing extremism. Okay, yeah, we don't like extremists of any hue or any colour. So, but at the moment, we seem to be doing that. I guess what I'd say, and the Jewish community is a particular target of these, so I understand your interest in that, but we're all a target in some sense. The only thing that comforts me is that one of these lone wolf terrorist attacks is not going to bring us to our knees. It'll kill us, it'll kill our families, but it's not going to bring the nation to its knees. And when it happens, we've seemed to have prevented an awful lot of them because our intelligence community is absolutely first class. But at some stage, something will get through and we'll get a Lint massacre, which is a true massacre. But again, I say, as someone who's interested in national security, that won't bring us to our knees. It may just make us very angry. And, I spent a lot of my last couple of years controlling our borders. And I am concerned that we are bringing in large numbers of people into this country, far in excess, I believe, that our cities can handle. And we seem to be in a situation where, although COVID has almost stopped that, we can't wait to start pouring people into our capitals again. And that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, thank you so much, Jim. I see that we've now got a small queue of questions. So okay. I'll hand back to Alan to moderate the questions.
Thanks, David. Yeah, we have got some questions. So if you do want to ask a question, now's the time to electronically raise your hand. And I've got Michael, Brian and Dennis, but I'm going to pull rank, Jim, and I'm going to ask you a question first.
Okay.
Jim, I want to ask you about Afghanistan. And I note that President Trump's now even talking about pulling the remainder of the American troops out of there. Well, as far as Afghanistan goes, will it ever end? What's going to happen?
Well, I don't think anyone knows. Afghanistan is in a better position now to survive Taliban assaults than it was in 2001. And so that is some benefit. The population in the cities are larger, they're better educated, the women are educated, they can see the value in a much more liberal lifestyle. But of course, all the countryside surrounding it and the highways are pretty well totally controlled by the Taliban. And the Americans, of course, have a particular habit of going into these wars, fighting very hard, getting lots of people killed, killing lots of people, and we trail along behind. And then they get tired of it, presidents change, and they pull out. And again, it goes to the issue of strategy. If you're not sure how you get into these wars, if they're not winnable, then don't go in. If you go into the war in order to see whether they're winnable, and that's quite legitimate, because often you can't tell whether a conflict is resolvable until you become involved, because the becoming involved changes entirely the nature of the conflict you become involved in. So it's legitimate to give it a try. But if you give it a try, don't then lock yourself in and then pour more troops in and then run away, because we've created this appalling destabilisation. And of course, the Americans have been trying to leave with honour. They've been trying to set a peace agreement with the Taliban. And, you know, we've seen this all before. And anyone who thinks that the Taliban will keep their word in any way, shape or form are fools. And of course, the nascent Afghan government was kept out of the peace talks until only recently. So what can we do about Afghanistan? I reckon there's not much at all. I reckon if the Americans keep 2,500 troops in there so that if they identify a terrorist cell that may come out and attack the West, then good. They've got the capability in the country to do something about it, or bring more capability in. You know, of those 2,500 people, the vast majority would want to be intelligence operatives and analysts and agents, so they know what's going on. Then they can bring forces in to do something. But you know, what more can we do? This is a 13-year or 15-year war, and we ain't going to win it if we're not prepared to get in there and die. And we're not prepared to do that at all. Therefore, I can't see any reason to stay.
Fair enough. Okay, Michael, you're up first. Please unmute yourself, and then Brian and Dennis.
Yes, I think I am unmuted. You can hear me?
Yep.
I can, Mike. Yeah.
Jim, as a former Major General of the Armed Forces, I've got enormous respect for you and our armed forces. Unfortunately, since Vietnam, I think that sort of respect has dwindled. But I just want to ask you two connecting questions. One is the first one, Jim, who's behind this inquisition into our special forces? Who's pushing this? And the second question is, the nature of warfare has dramatically changed. Really, ever since Vietnam, it's more terrorist style jungle warfare or terrorism style of warfare. Don't you think they should change the rules of engagement, particularly for the West? Because the Taliban or Al-Qaeda or Hamas, they're not going to sign up to any Geneva Convention. So why don't we just change the rules of warfare?
Let me take the second one first. My view is that we must obey the laws of armed conflict, because the laws of armed conflict essentially say that before you do something, it must be proportional. If you're driving past a village and a sniper fires on you, you don't muster the artillery and blow the village away. It must be humane. You can't cause suffering without which is disproportionate. You must be able to distinguish between the goodies and the baddies, and so that you can kill the baddies. And it must be necessary for what you're doing. So that was what I used in Iraq as my shorthand for every single thing that I did. Now, I was a general sitting back there. In the decisions that I made, I had at least 40 minutes to make those decisions. For a soldier who's on the front line, we don't give him the laws of armed conflict. We give him rules of engagement, and those rules of engagement are very, very simple. And if we do them right, they're very, very clear. But the overall point that I make is that you must obey the laws of armed conflict, and in doing that, you can win wars. We haven't won a war in living memory. That's not because of the soldiers. It's because of our strategy and our leadership. we picked the wrong wars at the wrong time with the wrong forces, and that's got nothing to do with the laws of armed conflict. We won every battle. This is the old saying in Vietnam: we won every battle and lost the war. I would say exactly the same thing has happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. Certainly, when I was in Iraq, no one ever beat us, and we applied the laws of armed conflict religiously. Yet we won all the time. How's the war going? Well, maybe time will tell. We may not win it. If you don't obey the laws of armed conflict, and you can be as tough and as hard obeying the laws of armed conflict as you want to be. There's no problems about that. But if you don't obey the laws of armed conflict, you get into a situation like that famous situation just after D-Day, where the German Das Reich Division moved a couple of 100 kilometres from southern France up to Normandy, and on the way massacred everyone that they passed through. Australians must not do that. Now, what we're seeing in relation to we would lower ourselves, lose the moral high ground, and lower ourselves to the status of the people who oppose us, who use unmitigated violence. Now, we still kill them, and we killed Al Qaeda, and then we killed ISIS in accordance with the laws of armed conflict and brought them to their absolute knees. But the Americans got sick of it and they went home, pretty well gone home. Are we picking the right wars? There's the big question. But whichever war we pick, we must stay with the laws of armed conflict. I mean, they've been developed from the 30 Years' War onwards, and there are millions of people, particularly civilians, alive because the Western liberal democracies obeyed them, and the Germans in the Second World War did not. The war crimes, which will be announced in greater detail tomorrow, that we've seen from Afghanistan, there's the only people who are behind them, in the sense that I think you mean, Mike, the only people who are behind them are the fellow soldiers in the Special Air Service Regiment. Now, this is critically important. Not one of those crimes is related to a battlefield. Now, we've got to think that through. Not one of those crimes is related to a battlefield. The allegation is made that there are appalling crimes committed by people off the battlefield, because it's far too hard to judge soldiers on the battlefield in the circumstance that we're on now. How did it start? The soldiers' mates came out finally and said, this is going on and it should not be going on. Wait till the CDF announces tomorrow the detail of the crimes, and we will be taken back to to a terrible situation where certain soldiers in certain circumstances, only a small number, and a breakdown in the supervision of those soldiers allowed them to do terribly un-Australian things. I'd challenge the statement that you made that war has changed. I mean, yeah, the Second World War. I mean, the civilians. We had 60 to 80 million die in the Second World War. The vast majority were civilians. That was a different kind of war than the Korean War. And then we got in, and at the same time the Korean War was raging, we were fighting in Malaya, and it was exactly the same. It was jungle, it was civilians, it was no uniforms in many, many occasions. Then straight into Vietnam, even more so. Jungles, small teams working in the population. And, you know, you come to Afghanistan and Iraq. When I was in Iraq, we called it war amongst the people, because the people who were opposing us couldn't oppose us if they stood out in the open, because we'd kill them. So they stayed in amongst the people and they exploited our laws of armed conflict. So we just had to go in amongst the people, and we lost lives because of it. But we worked extraordinarily hard to minimise it. So this is going to be awful when we hear that Australians did certain things. But the vast majority of the 24,000 people in uniform who served in Afghanistan over the last 13 years did a very good job. And there were 3,000 special forces people, or some people went many times, 3,000 servings in Afghanistan. And there's only a very small number of people, I believe, who will be charged with war crime, may be charged with alleged war crimes.
Okay. Brian, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Senator Molan, I hope you can tell me what I've been reading is fake news. It goes along the lines of we're buying a fleet of submarines which were antiquated 10 years ago at enormous expense to be delivered in a decade and a half to our children and grandchildren. I hope this is wrong.
Take it from me, there is hardly a word of truth in what you've just said. There is an industry at the moment which is having great fun tearing the submarine contract to bits based on sheer ignorance. Now, let me explain it this way. Australia has a very, very good submarine force at the moment. The 6 Collins class submarines are world standard submarines. We stuffed them up totally 10 or so years ago because we decided to save money by taking $200 million out of their maintenance vote because we are monumentally stupid people. And guess what? The submarines didn't work. So at one stage we were down to 1 submarine that we could use of the 6. We are now back to 4 submarines at sea, 1 submarine in light maintenance, 1 submarine in heavy maintenance. That's above world standards. Their weapons and their equipment is good. So that's the Collins. That's the current submarine force. We're about to, I think we're on the verge of announcing a midlife update for that submarine. So we will gut the thing, put in more up-to-date battle systems, more up-to-date weapons, etc., and then we'll get another 20 or 30 years out of those submarines. In order to go into the future, we have let a contract with the French to build 12 submarines because it's the Navy's assessment that they need 12 submarines to get X of them into the sea and operational in order to do certain things that they specify across the north of the country, and they need to be long-range submarines. There was no off-the-shelf submarine in the world, none at all, in the world that could do that for us. So going from Sydney to Perth is what, 3,000 kilometres by sea, maybe a bit more. If you're going to go up into the north of into North Asia, that must be at least 4,000 or 5,000 kilometres. We can't buy a German Baltic boat, which politely goes out and sails around the Baltic and comes home for the weekends. The Japanese submarines are not long-range submarines as we believe that we need them. Now, a lot of people have challenged whether we need long-range submarines. Okay, I'm not a submariner, but the Navy has come out and said we need long-range submarines. And again, we are such silly people that we prohibit ourselves from having nuclear anything. So the Navy could not ask for nuclear anything. Now, that's the second dumbest thing I've ever heard of. So the Navy has come out and said, okay, the only submarine in the world that can do it is a variation on a long-range nuclear submarine the French are in the process of building. So we're going to take that as the basis. Over 2 or 3 years, we will redesign it and rework it so that by 2033, we will have the first submarine in the water. And we've never built submarines from this base at this level of technology before. So the first submarine will be a practice submarine on how to build submarines. It'll have much the same batteries in it as the Collins has got. But every submarine from then on will be incrementally better, because suppose a new generation of batteries comes through, and people are saying that the next generation of batteries in the future sometime, I've read prophecies that, in 20 years, a submarine may leave Fremantle, for example, spend a long period at sea and not even have to take a diesel engine to recharge its batteries. So, the minister totally assures us, the Labor Party, because they're out for giving us a kicking, are saying that it's gone from $50 billion to $80 billion. That's a problem. The minister assures us, and I followed this through in great detail and I only vaguely understand it still, that's roughly the same amount of money from when we were talking about the 50 billion to the 80 billion now that we've gone from what was originally 6 submarines to 12, so, you know, the whole bunch of stuff like this. Essentially, they have not increased in cost over that period of time. The cost is now $80 billion over the next, until 2054. Now, I think we don't need them now, unless there's a war tomorrow, and there might be a war tomorrow, but we're not going to get them now. There's no way you can get them now. So we've got 6 good submarines, which will last us with a major update until we get these things in the water. So they are submarines designed for the next generation.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, very well explained. Dennis, your turn. Please unmute yourself. And then I've got Terry and perhaps Leon.
Here we go. Okay, Senator Molan, 2 issues you've raised, and I have 2 questions therefore. With regard to the sale of Darwin ports and of businesses in Australia to Chinese entities, if I'm a company director of an Australian publicly listed company, I cannot purchase a business in China.
Yep.
I cannot purchase a business in Indonesia. I cannot even purchase a house in Indonesia, but we are allowing countries with which we do not have the same rights to purchase our assets. Is this not a rather silly situation? And should we not be protecting our equity in our businesses and in our properties? That's number one.
Right.
A second question I have for you is, the recommendation to the government is that we hold 90 days of fuel in reserve in case of conflict situations or downturns in production or blockages in the ocean, etc. We're, as you say, holding 23 days of fuel, and we're now asking the US to hold additional stores of fuel for Australia. But they are as far away from us as the oil fields in the Middle East that are producing the oil. This seems ludicrous.
Okay, let me start with the purchase. I've raised this issue on a number of occasions. Every time I raise it and say, why don't we lease instead of sell? People say you wouldn't get the same volume of investment in this country. I feel uncomfortable about it. I've got no easy solution to it. The rule of unforeseen circumstances or consequences may come in if we take some high principle thing. You might remember the Japanese did exactly the same thing to us in the 60s and the 70s, and they all went home in the end. There's a lot of rich farmers around and a lot of rich banks too. A lot of the banks bought up the land when the Japanese went home. Yes, it does contribute markedly to our prosperity. I can't comment, Dennis, anymore on that because I don't know the details. I am assured that it encourages a vast capital flow to this country. If it's the right thing, I feel very uncomfortable about it. In relation to the 90 days is an International Energy Authority, IEA, I think, International Energy Authority requirement on something like 57 countries, which is not related to conflict. It's an agreement between these countries which say that we will hold 90 days worth of fuel anywhere in the world, but we own it. Doesn't have to be held in Australia. And we recently, about a year ago, bought a whole bunch of stuff, and we're holding it in the Netherlands. In order, not for us. This is in order. Suppose there's an enormous flood in Bangladesh, as there seems to be every year, and all the refineries and everything gets done over. The countries which are part of this agreement have the fuel to supply to help others. So that's the requirement. It's not an Australian set requirement. We have no requirements at all because we don't have a strategy. We have we don't say we need 180. We need 6 months worth of fuel in this country in case we're cut off in conflict. We don't say that in any way, shape or form. What Angus Taylor's doing, and I think he's doing a great job, what Angus Taylor is doing is that all of a sudden crude became remarkably cheap, pretty well close to zero. So we bought $92 billion worth of it. We couldn't store it in Australia, so we dumped it into America. They're very happy to do that for us. At the moment, we're subsidising our refineries because we must keep refineries working in this country. But we've also asked for tenders to build storage in Australia for whatever we finally decide on as how much we want to keep. This is, if you lack a strategy, you don't know how much you should keep, how much you should store. Who is to say that 23 days is too much or too little? But your point is exactly right. If we rely on the Americans, the estimate is we will not get, and we say, okay, well, send us the fuel, and we bring it to Australia and we refine it and put it back on the streets. It's going to take roughly 40 days to do that. So best of luck for your frozen goods being delivered to Woolies.
Okay, Terry, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Good evening, Senator Molan.
Terry.
We caught up at CPAC and my wife was very impressed with the selfie, more so your picture than mine.
Good, thank you.
Which strikes me that the most important asset that, excuse me, I'll just stop that Australia has is the access to very cheap energy. I can only tell you what I would like, which would be to see the Liberal Party move away from this crazy move towards so-called renewables, because we're going to end up with no energy at all. And that can't be good for our national security. So is there a chance that the Liberal Party will see some sense and differentiate itself from the Greens, who hate everything, and get us back towards a low energy economy and rentable energy economy?
Yeah, that's certainly the overwhelming desire. And we have a minister for energy price reduction. I forget exactly what he's called, Minister for Energy and Price Reduction or something. I forget what Angus Taylor's called. That's one of his major jobs, and a whole lot of things have been doing it to do that. Now, you and I both know, I suspect that you and I both know, that whatever we do in Australia will have absolutely no impact on the world climate. It is a very, very strange situation that we are in. But so there must be other reasons for us doing it. But what I like about the Prime Minister's energy policy is that we've signed up to 26 to 28% reduction in emissions by 2030, and we are so far ahead of that, it's not funny. And we have met our Kyoto 1 and Kyoto 2 targets, and we will meet our Paris targets. Is that good or is that bad? That depends on where you stand. If you're Labor or if you're Green, you think that's appalling. If you're in our party, you say, well, I certainly say, well, could be worse, could be a lot worse. Now, what I do like, though, is that what the Prime Minister has said, he has said, we will meet our requirements, but not at the gross expense to our economy. Whereas Labor at the last election offered us economical destruction for a pointless objective, a pointless target. And that target, I think, was a 50% emissions reduction by 2030. And now, of course, they've gotten rid of that and they're looking at net zero emissions by 2050. That's, every country that signs up for that is delusional. But that doesn't matter. That's their view and that's their belief, and that's their right to do it. What we, being in government, is doing is bringing at least a modicum of common sense and responsibility to the climate argument. The reason that the right wing of the Labor Party can't influence all of the Labor Party to come closer to ours as they would like to, Joel Fitzgibbon, etc., is because they rely on the Greens or they'll never get in. You'll never get a Labor government. You need a Labor Greens government. So they can't go there. They can't say, why don't we use small nuclear reactors? That's impossible for them because the Greens are religiously against nuclear power, mindlessly against nuclear power. So I understand I understand that our policies, I believe, are very, very good. It's a technology-based way, not a taxing-based way of achieving a reduction in prices. But I totally agree. It was Terry, wasn't it? I totally agree, Terry. We have got to provide low-cost fuel in order to get our manufacturers working so that we don't rely on overseas.
Yep, thank you. Now, we are coming up to time. I've got Bill next. So, Bill, please unmute yourself. And I'm just, I might need to apologise to the others because we've got a lot of questions still sitting there, but we may not be able to get to you. So, Bill, please ask your question.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks very much. Senator Molan, sorry if you've addressed this in your opening remarks. I didn't quite catch your introduction, but I wanted to ask you about your view into the priority that the government has given this year to the defence budget, and whether you think, you know, there's a lot there, and I think we've met our commitment, our small increase in commitment to, I think it's about 2%, something like that. I'm reminded of the points about the increase in reserves, the cyber security, the F-35 program, and whether you think the composition of the budget met your expectation as far as priorities globally and what your views are. I know it's probably hard to answer in a concise manner, but I just like that during the Howard era, we were talking about that Son of Star Wars program and how good the Iron Dome is in Israel and how much peace of mind it gives to the citizens, and whether you think there's some of the mix that would be better for the Australian people.
Well, we've got to decide what war we are going to fight. Now that's the key. We've now, over the last 75 years, we have had we have not needed to defend ourselves, really. The Americans have provided us both security and prosperity. Prosperity because they stabilised the world, particularly the trading routes, and we use those trading routes and we become fat, dumb and happy. The problem I have is that I don't know, and I always ask when I'm in committees and we have generals and admirals and air marshals appear before us, I always say, what war are you preparing for? Because that's the only way you can assess whether we're buying the right things. And they don't answer for the simple reason it's a most unfair question, because the only people who can decide what war we're preparing for is us in the government. And we should tell them what war we are preparing for. So, Bill, if I'm to say whether the money, that $270 billion, which is, I welcomed it. I thought it was fantastic. It's the most we've ever had. It's the Prime Minister's speech in launching that amount of money was fabulous and realistic, the best I've ever heard. Since 1976, when the first white paper came out. So that part is good. But because we lack an overall strategy, we haven't said to ourselves, we're going to fight either the little wars of choice that we've had over the last couple of years, and the ADF has never been better, in my view. It is a beautiful force at the moment, but in my view, given what I think, and that's just me, I think coming down the track, the ADF lacks lethality, it lacks mass, it's not big enough, and it lacks sustainability. It can't fight for long enough. So I keep saying this, and that's the reason that I came back into Parliament, was for us to figure this particular problem out. And that problem is, what war is this nation, not the ADF, what war is this nation preparing for in the future? That's what the national security strategy should answer. So, yeah. Bill, I can't help you, mate, until we get a national security strategy.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And on that note, look, I'm sorry, everybody, we're going to have to call it a night because we have gone a whisker over time. Jim, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. You're a beacon of common sense. I'm just wondering if you're the the voice of reason in the government, I'm just a bit worried about everybody else. Thank you again for joining us. I'll just hand back to David to make the closing remarks.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, firstly, Senator Jim Molan, thank you so much. And, you know, I hope sometime, perhaps during the course of next year, we can get you back again for another discussion. Now, just remains to let you know what's happening next week. And we actually have a very interesting military man next week, an extraordinary person who is an academic, a researcher, ex-US Marines. He served in the IDF. He has a PhD in history from Cambridge University, and he's researched an extraordinary subject, produced a book called Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, very confronting title. He's won a prize for that work, and it's been translated into 11 languages. And so Dr. Brian Mark Rigg will be joining us next week for that discussion. He's got an extraordinary personal story as well as his academic story to present. And finally, if there's anyone here who's not yet supporting HAA, do like and follow the Facebook page. If you're not yet on our email list, simply send an email to office@jewishassociation.org.au. And of course, if you're not yet a member, and if you're able to assist in some tangible way, you can go to the website and fix that. So thank you again, Senator Molan, and back to you, Alan, for the final close.
Yeah, thanks, David. Now, I just want to make one small point. I do notice that some people are joining our sessions virtually at the last minute or so, or the last 5 minutes that we're going. So I'm just wondering if you're perhaps not allowing for daylight saving. So if you're one of those people that have joined us in the last 5 minutes, thinking you've come to the beginning of the session, it might be because you haven't allowed for daylight saving. So please check that out. On that note, we say goodbye to you, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. And until we join you again, a very good evening to you all. Thanks and goodbye to everybody.